Hello everyone, welcome to Clo Knits. Today we are deep diving into something that I absolutely adore. You might have heard me say that I love rustic wool. You might have seen me knit with unspun wool, particularly Nutiden wool, and I've had questions, multiple questions asking me how Nutiden compares to, for example, Plötulopi or Manchelopi. And it is today that I get to sample different unspun wool and tell you my opinion on them. What are they like? How do they differ? How are they the same? How much do they cost? Where can you find them? Etc. So I'm wearing a Nutiden sweater for the occasion, obviously, because I have a lot of them. So this is the throwback cardigan knit in Nutiden wool. I absolutely adore it. So let's start with Nutiden. Why not? Because it is the one that I have the most experience with. So I will be reviewing Nutiden. It comes in a bunch of different colors, but it has a particularity that it is only sold on their website. So Nutiden is done by Unspun, and all the links will be in the description box below that I will mention today. So it will only be available on their website only once a month, and every month the colors are different because they do produce a batch of yarn, and once it is sold, it is sold. It is not coming back. So it can create some frustrations because once you started knitting with a color and you run out, it's really difficult to find more. But it is also amazing because you know that you have this unique wool that will never be produced again in the exact same way. So they use their own sheep to make a mix. Every time the mix is a little bit different, and then they dye it, and then they make it into this pencil roving, and that's what you get from Unspun Nutiden. Nutiden is generally sold at about, so I'm gonna be talking in Canadian prices because I'm Canadian, but you can always Google how much that is to you. And even then, now I'm talking in Canadian prices for the Nutiden, but I can say it in kroners. So it's 158 kroners per 100 grams of wool, generally Swedish crowns. And that equals roughly $20 Canadian for me for 100 grams of this yarn, plus the international shipping, obviously. So it is not super expensive. It is a one strand of yarn that is closer to a lace weight, could be a fingering weight, but you'll see that all of those that I'm going to present today can be knit at very different gauges because I didn't really talk about what an unspun wool is, but an unspun wool is exactly how it sounds. It is not spun. So it is technically what is called a pencil roving in the spinning world. So it is fiber that has not been spun at all. So it is the state it is in before it gets spun into a ply for a yarn. So you get to knit with the fiber that has still all the air, all the loftiness, and it has its pros and cons. Pros being it's super light, super warm because it traps in all the air. Con, it's highly breakable, very easy to break, but then pro, it felts back together in no time. Yeah, so this is Nutiden. Number one. I already know how that one feels, but all the other ones are new to me. Second one I got, well, I got them all at the same time, but the second one that probably is the most known of all the unspun wool, the mother of them all, is this one, which is the Plötulopi by Istex. Plötulopi is a Lopi style yarn, which is Icelandic wool. Lopi style yarn is a very kind of scratchy, very rustic, very crunchy type of yarn, but it is warm, 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 and it can create those gorgeous Icelandic colorwork sweaters. This one got sent to me by Pompon Laine Café in Trois-Rivières. Thank you so much, Pompon, for sending me some beautiful Plötulopi. Plötulopi is available in 30 colors, which is amazing because, like I said, you can create colorwork sweaters amazingly with that. Creates a very winter appropriate garment. It says on the description that it's a DK weight, but again, I'll show you the samples that I'm gonna knit and you'll see. It is $12.25 Canadian for 100 grams, which approximately is 300 meters of yarn, 328 yards. I received this one from Rive Compagnie in Quebec. This one is called The Country Roving by Briggs and Little. Briggs and Little is a very old Canadian mill that makes great like woolly wools. They are a big mill. They produce a lot of wool. It's 100% Canadian wool. And this one, it has the particularity that it is I'll find the end. It has 5 strands running through it. So it is a bulky weight unspun wool. I've never worked with it. I'm very excited to try it. The color is gorgeous, heathered brown. This one is sold in 227 grams. So, 100 grams, 227 grams, it is packed. But since it's a bulky weight, it only has 155 yards, which is 141 meter. It is $18, which would end up being $7.92 per 100 grams. But again, if you wanted to work a bit, you could split those strands into, have one fingering weight yarn times 5. So you could do 155 yards times 5 for one plate. That would become a very non-expensive sweater really quickly. Or you could mix and match colors with the plies. The question is, how hard are you willing to work to get there? Because you do have to separate the strands by hand. I will try to do that and report back if I like it or if I don't. This is Manchelopi from the Wool Dreamer. Wool Dreamers is located in Spain. They have these Manchega sheep, and I can tell right away that it's a little bit loftier and springier and probably less scratchy as well. And this one was sent to me by Crochet Co in Montreal, and they have, I believe, 8 colors at Crochet Co of this Manchelopi wool, and it is 100 grams, $23.50 for 235 meters in one plate. It is 35 meters, meaning 258 yards, because a little bit like the Briggs and Little, it has multiple plies. So this one has 2 strands. It's not plies because they're not plied. It's strands. It has 2 strands. So if you wanted to split it in half, then you would get, 500 yards in a 100 gram plate. Again, do you want to be splitting your yarn in half the whole way through? We'll see. And then last but not least, I have this yarn that I discovered while searching for unspun wool. I was making a big search. What else can I find that I don't know of yet? Because I wanted to be thorough in my, deep dive. And I found this magnificent wool. It's so gorgeous. This is from Crux Fibre up in Yukon. Brittany is the owner at Crux Fibres. She dyes yarn, but she also partners with local farmers to create local wool, or what she calls low mileage wool. This one is not part of her low mileage wool. It's a different wool, but it is a 100% domestic Canadian yarn created from virgin wool, and it has many different Canadian crossbreeds. This to me is magical because it's very local. It's helping the local economy up in the Yukon, which I adore. I know exactly where it comes from, and I know that the sheep were treated amazingly, a little bit like the Nutiden also does in their little neck of the woods, and Manchelopi does in their neck of the woods. But this one is like close to my neck of the woods, which is amazing. So I will be sampling these. These are 200 grams of fiber per plate. But Brittany does say that they're more like 215. It says on the website minimum 200 grams, but there will more likely be heavier. And it is sold at $28 per plate for 365 meters or 400 yards per plate. So for now, there's those 4 colors. She does do different batches. So those are going to be sold sometimes as a pre-sale. Sometimes once she received them and she has extras, she'll put them on her website. But you might want to jump on it when you see it, because it will come in batches again with the availability of the wool. So I have a lot to do. I have a lot to sample. I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to check with my own hands and my own eyes. Let's get knitting and sampling. Okay, so let's start with a comparison with the size that it comes in. Like what does it look like when it showed up at my door? This is a Plötulopi, which is the most known of all those. It is a very thin plate like this. And, you know, this is my hand. I have a very small woman's hand. Then we have the Briggs & Little City Roving. So it is massively thicker than all my other plates. Actually, it's not thicker than it's the same thickness as the Nutiden, but it is pretty thick. It is smaller around, and it is dense. Like it's a cake. It's a pound cake. It's not a little fluffy angel cake. So this is the Briggs & Little that was packaged very densely. Crux Fibres, so it's from the Yukon, and it is, like you can see, much, much, much wider, but it is also thinner. So this one is much thinner here, and it is 200 grams for this one, whereas the Plötulopi is 100 grams of wool. So 200 grams of wool here. When I'm saying thinner and thicker, I'm just talking about how it comes packaged. Obviously, I'm going to knit with it and tell you the difference in the strands. This is the Manchelopi, which is, you know, a little bit between the Briggs & Little and the 2 thinner ones. And it is, you know, average circles, bigger circle than this one, a little bit bigger circle than this one as well. And it is also sold in 100 grams. And this one is the Nutiden, which I already took some off of the center because I had no plates of Nutiden that were not dipped into already. I think all my colors have already been knit with, but you can see that it's a little bit on the thicker side as well, and it's fluffy. I feel like it's fluffier in its packaging. It's packaged quite, it has a lot of air in the plate compared to this. This is the less airy, and this. So that's a comparison of what you're going to receive when you order those. Here we go. And yeah, let's compare the strands. So the yarns are placed in order that I showed you in the previous clip, which is the Plötulopi, Briggs & Little, Crux Fibre, Manchelopi, and Nutiden. So as you can tell, this one comes in one single, you know, piece, and it is wool that has a very long staple with little crimp. Okay, it's not very crimpy at all, and it has no elasticity either. Then we have the Briggs & Little that comes exactly like this. It is wrapped around the ball in 5 strands. So it is actually meant to be knitted like this in a very bulky weight. But as you can tell, I can separate them really easily. So I'm going to try to knit with it 5 strands and see what happens. And then I'm going to try and knit with it with, you know, less strand and see how easy it is to unwind the yarn and separate it at the same time. This one has a slight crimp. It's a little bit crimpier than the Plötulopi, and it doesn't really have any stretch either. When it comes to softness, I can't really tell you right now which is softer or less soft. I'm gonna have to like knit it and hold it against my skin. But when I touch it with my hands and my and put it against my face, which is what I do with yarn apparently, I don't feel a huge difference in between all of those, so we'll have to see. This is the Crux Fiber, so again it's one strand, and it is a little bit thicker, I would say, than the strand of the Plötulopi, but it is also airier, so it has a bigger crimp, like it's much more twisty and crimpy, and it has this beautiful stretch that the others don't really have, probably because of the breed of wool that they are using to create this beautiful yarn in the Yukon. And this one is the Manchelopi, which is Manchega wool, which also has a little bit more stretch, a tiny bit more than the other ones, but not as much, I would say, as the Crux Fiber one, and has a little bit more crimp as well as it's similar to the Crux Fiber more than it is similar to the Plötulopi, in my opinion. And that one is wound like this in 2 strands. And then last but not least is the Nutiden, which has this, it's more similar, the crimp is more similar to the Plötulopi, even though it is not completely the same, obviously not the same sheep and everything. And it is much thinner, so you can see that like just manipulating it, from taking it off the ball and just like putting it down and touching it a little, it's already starting in places to be very, very thin. So you'll know that different colors in Nutiden have different variation of like the breed they mix in, so it's going to be a little bit different. I have no idea about the others. If you've knit with the others before in multiple colors, can you please tell us in the comments if different colors will have different textures or thickness, or if they're really the same across the board. So next up, we're going to be knitting with these. I'm going to knit with them as they are intended to be knit with, which means as they were put in the plate. And then I'm also going to double up those that are single-stranded, and I'm also going to, divide those and see what happens. it's time for a little soak because I'm not doing things halfway. I'm actually gonna soak and block to make sure that the results are true to what it would be in a garment. Okay, so here are all my swatches, washed and blocked. I have thoughts. They are all great, but they all have different feelings, different gauges, different pros and cons. So here we go. I'm gonna show you what the difference are. I'm gonna start with the single strand yarns, and as you can tell, I did not do all of them as single strands. I did not love splitting. Well, let's start with this one. So this one is the 5 strand Briggs and Little yarn. It is great. Like, it feels great. It doesn't feel too scratchy. It's definitely less scratchy than the Plötulopi. It is dense. I used a US 10 needle, so a 6mm needle to do this swatch. It was hard on my hands, so it created this really dense fabric. I could have gone up to a bigger needle, but I appreciate that you could do a cowl, a hat, a blanket, something that's really dense and warm with this yarn at that gauge. Obviously, that gauge would not be great for something light. I mean, it is light in weight, so you can make a really thick sweater that's going to be not too heavy, which is great. But it is definitely a super chunky yarn. Super chunky. Love it. Love the color. Love the effect. Big stitches. Amazing. Just be prepared to, have to knit a pretty thick yarn. So here we go for that one. I did split it to create the double strand swatch. So here we go. Those are all my double strand swatch. So I'll end with the single strand. Double, 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 double. Okay. Let's talk about them. Because I feel like this is where the Unspun shines the most. Not like I really love the single, and I'll tell you which ones I love as a single, but double-stranded Unspun wool is just a perfect marriage of thickness and warmth, but also lightness. So the fact that it's unspun makes it super light while still being thick and warm, and getting also amazing yardage for the weight. So yeah, I absolutely, I have 3-4 sweaters that are double stranded with this, and I will absolutely be going to this for my next Unspun sweater thing. Let's talk some more about it. So as you can tell, they're not all the same size exactly. I did knit 25 stitches and 32 rows. 26 rows for each of those. And I used the same needles, which was a 5mm needle, so a US 8. And these are my results. So my Nutiden and Plötulopi are, I would say, the tallest of the bunch. This one is very much the lightest, less dense fabric, so you can see through it. I would probably, if I wanted to make something more dense, I would have to go down needle size. No problem, you could go down. That's the beauty of those yarns too. You can play with the needle size a whole lot. So I would compress it more to create a fabric that is more winterproof. But it is a beautiful fabric with the yarn held double. I pulled from the center and the outside of the cake, which was not an issue for me, but some people like to wind it in a ball double-stranded before they start knitting with it. Yeah, it is very light, very floofy, a little prickly, but not as much as this one. So I'm going to compare it right away to the Plötulopi, which is super wiry, as you can tell. It has big strands of floof coming out of it. This one is thicker, not that much thicker, but thicker enough that it is denser. You cannot see through it the way you can see through this one. And yeah, it just feels very rustic. It's definitely gonna be itchier, but it also is gonna be better winter protection than this one because it has more hair, guard hair, like, filling in the stitches. I have a lot of those, and when it's knit at a tighter gauge with smaller needles, it does do that. This one does do that. So this is this one. Then I would go to this one, which has kind of a mix between these, these and these. Those, I would put the categories like this is more wiry and a little bit itchier, whereas these are very soft and crimpy, and this one kind of falls in the middle for me. It has more of a stretch. These are more floppy and don't really hold their shape as much, I think, as this one would. And this one's a little bit stretchier. It is denser. It is thicker, absolutely thicker than this and this. Love the fabric for the 2 strands. But would not love making a big project while having to split all those strands from the ball. I ended up like winding 3 strands in a ball and then 2 strands and then like unrolling and doing a little bit of those 2 balls at the same time. It was cumbersome. I really love the results. I really wish that Briggs and Little would make this yarn in smaller strands as well, smaller number of strands, because this with 2 strands would make a gorgeous sweater. Like, I would love to wear this as a sweater. I just don't want to spend the time splitting all the strands. If you do, though, it is very economical and you will get amazing yardage from this plate of wool if you split the strands. Amazing yardage. Like, this is so light. It's unbelievable. Okay, and then the last one, and that when it comes to the size, as you can tell, it knitted shorter in length like this, but wider because the stitches, the stitch gauge got wider, but the row gauge is a little bit smaller. These two, like this one is very much bigger than this one. This one is the Manchelopi, and it is spun, not spun, it is unspun, but it is wound in 2 strands, and it creates this beautiful lightweight fabric at that gauge that you can see through a little, but it's so springy and squishy and soft. It's great. I would love to have a shawl in this, this gauge. Had a lot of fun knitting with it, no problem whatsoever. Again, I did not split it into single strands because I don't think I would like doing it. Doesn't mean you can't. I just didn't feel like it after dealing with this one. I was just done with splitting strands. So again, you could, but maybe you don't want to for smaller projects anyway. Which comes to this one, which is an amazing discovery for me. As you can tell, it's denser. I don't know if you can tell it from the light coming through it. Maybe you cannot, but I can. This one is absolutely denser. It's thicker under my thumb. It is similar in feel than the Manchelopi, so I wouldn't say that one is softer than the other. They're both very soft, but this one's definitely denser and a little bit heavier, but like they're super, super light. So this is an amazing fabric for me at that gauge with this size wool. It is a little bit, like I said, denser and thicker than the Manchelopi. It also feels hardier, I guess. This one feels very lightweight, very much like a cloud. Okay, last but not least, single strand. So I only did 3 samples single strand. because of all the reasons mentioned earlier, which is I didn't feel like splitting strands, but they are very different. Um, as you can tell, this one had a lot of sproing. It came back on itself a whole lot, whereas this one has much less sproing. It comes back a lot like this, boink, but it doesn't stretch out that much here. I just love the feel of this. Plötulopi changed a whole lot in a wash and block. Like, you absolutely 100% have to soak these. I soaked them all in very hot water in order to like just release the lanolin and all, just give them a good soak, and they just came into themselves with the soak. So absolutely don't discard all these wools before soaking it. Like, as you can tell, this is the biggest one of the bunch, the Nutiden, and I believe that it is the biggest one of the bunch because it is so fragile and thin that I was knitting it at a much I was keeping my tension very low, because if you pull on this yarn when it's held single, it will break for sure. So this one did not break on me while I was knitting it, but there are moments where it got so small. I almost was tempted to just break it and, felt it back together and keep going, which is what I do with Nutiden. When it breaks, I just felt with my hands, like I spit splice. Sometimes I don't even need spit, just the heat will do it. But I want it to be as true as possible to what it would look like if I didn't break it. Because like when I've worked with it single in the past, sometimes when I hit the thinnest spots, I'll just double it on itself to kind of fill it in. But I wanted you to see what it looks like without doing that. And definitely some of those stitches are going to be very, very fragile. I mean, if you pull on it, nothing happens. Like, it's not going to break right away, but it wouldn't be, it probably wouldn't be able to sustain a lot of friction. Or if it got caught in something, it would probably break at some point. But the staples are quite long, so I don't know. Whereas this one very much holds up to being knit held single. I really like the Plötulopi single. It's very, very light. I would absolutely knit a color work sweater in Plötulopi held single. And this is just gorgeous. For me, those tiny little stitches in that very floofy single strand is just a piece, like, it's a piece of art for me. Am I crazy? Maybe I am. But I really like how this came together. I have 4 colors of this, and now I'm trying to figure out which stripy design I will be making with it, because it's much softer than both of those. This is 100% the itchiest. This is right after, and this is absolutely the softest. So here you go for all the swatches. Let's wrap this up. So now I'm on to figuring out what to do with all this yarn that I received graciously from so many local businesses. I have a few more colors of a few of those, so you'll be seeing more of these on my channel. I'm absolutely an Unspun lover. They all have their absolute unique thing that makes them different from one another. Let me know if you knit something with Unspun before. If you haven't, if after this video it makes you want to, or maybe not. And yeah, which one strikes your fancy in all those. Did you know about all of these? Tell me all about it. I was super happy to do this for you guys and for me, because I learned quite a bit while doing it. Let me know if it's a type of video that you would like to see more of on my channel, me testing different yarns and seeing what they look like against one another. I'll see you again very soon. Happy knitting.